to open?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good evening. This is a meeting of the Finance Committee, joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen. It's Wednesday, March 5th, 2025. We're going to discuss tonight some various economic issues in the state and how it could impact our town. This meeting is being video recorded, and I believe the Board of Selectmen has to open their meeting.
Correct. Is there a motion to open the Board of Selectmen meeting?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Please rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight to listen to our concerns. We're just a small town here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but we have a lot of big voices, and I hope other town finance committees are doing the same thing that we're doing tonight. Before we get into the agenda, I would like everyone to introduce themselves. So, Eric, why don't you start?
Eric McGuinn, Finance Committee. How you doing? Thanks for coming tonight.
Yeah, you bet.
Yes, thank you for coming. My name is Eric Chu, Finance Committee.
Kevin Gaspel, Board of Selectmen.
David Warner, Board of Selectmen.
Bob Hinckley, Board of Selectmen.
Mike Boucher, Chair, Finance Committee.
Susan Delgado, Vice Chair, Finance Committee.
Pete Benoit, Finance Committee and Master Plan Committee.
Bob St. Jean, Finance Committee.
Good evening, Kristen Flynn, Finance Committee. Lisa Tomlinson, Finance Committee.
Phil Adams, Finance Committee. Thank you.
And gentlemen, you want to introduce?
Sure, I'm Steve Willett. I represent a couple of districts in this town. And
I'm Mark Sylvia. I'm the state representative for the 10th Bristol District, which is 2 precincts in the town of Acushnet, 1 and 2A. The whole towns of Fairhaven, Mattapoisett, Marion, Rochester, and then 3 precincts in Ward 1 in the city of New Bedford. So, pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming tonight. We really appreciate it, and it means a lot to us and to our residents. So I'd like to start, we have an agenda that we're going to follow. There's some topics on here. So I basically want to take utilities and green mandates, and we're going to kind of lump them together because they basically go together. So I'd like to discuss the utility costs, green mandates. As we all know, it's been a hot topic for a while now, with utility rates being out of control, gas, electric. I started doing some research myself last August in 2024 when I saw that my electric bill was $200 more than the previous August in 2023. However, I actually utilized 2% less energy, but it was still $200 more. So I was pretty irritated with that. So that kind of led me to researching a little bit more. So I printed up a couple things. So I did a little homework on here. So I printed up something from mass.gov. This was the press release from Governor Healy when she signed the climate law to advance clean energy transition. This is dated 11/21/2024. So I just want to read a few excerpts from this. So Governor Maura Healy signed into law an act promoting clean energy grid, advancing equity and protecting ratepayers. This legislation will accelerate clean energy development and improve energy affordability, create an equitable infrastructure siting process, allow for multi-state clean energy procurements, promote non-gas heating, expand access to electric vehicles, and create jobs and support workers throughout the energy transition. Just a couple more things I want to read from here. So this is a quote from one of the senators in Lexington, Mike Barrett. Says this bill sets a balance. We need to upgrade the grid without swamping the household budget. People want to keep the lights on, but at a price they can afford. And someday, if they haven't done so already, they'll want to drive electric vehicles. In dozens of ways in this bill, and notably by restraining gas expansion, as we pursue electric expansion, we make sure the future is green and clean, and we also protect the middle class and working class pocketbooks. Now, I'm sorry, but that just didn't age well. That is anything but the truth of what's happening right now. If you look at what people are paying for gas and electric, it's just, it's really out of control. And something needs to be done about it. The other thing I'd researched was I didn't realize that the Department of Public Utilities are the ones that set the rates. And they're actually comprised of a three-person commission. Three environmental attorneys, they're all appointed by the governor. So they set the rates that are negotiated by Eversource, and then the governor signs off on them. So I find it laughable that Governor Healy is out there now demanding that they lower the rates, when in fact she's the one that actually signed off on them. I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me to hear that kind of stuff, and then for Eversource to first say they're going to give everybody a 5% reduction, right? That was laughable. That's nothing on somebody's $500 electric bill. And then they bumped it up to 10%, which is still laughable. But then they want to recoup that back a couple months later down the road with interest. I mean, it's appalling to me that this is going on right now. And in my opinion, what's really driving a lot of these increases in electricity and gas, the fact that 2 pipelines were shut down by Governor Healy, something that she bragged about it, and the fact that we're all subsidizing all these green mandates through our utility bills. Maybe a lot of residents don't realize that, but we are, and it's expensive. The cost to do this long term is really troubling. Another thing that I looked up. So this is a group. It's called the Americans for Prosperity.org. So it's an article, New England think tanks. So there's 7 think tanks throughout New England. So they're taking all the states. Green energy mandates will double electric rates, causing rolling blackouts in the region. So I just want to read a little bit of this because it's kind of interesting. With New England state governments committed to reducing their carbon emissions at least by 80% in 2050, residents and businesses can expect electricity rates to double, along with rolling blackouts, according to a new joint report completed by several of the region's leading think tanks. The study concludes that weather-dependent renewable energies like wind and solar simply cannot meet regional standards for electricity. Compliance with the New England decarbonization plans would cost roughly $815 billion through 2050, the report concludes. That's mind-boggling to me, that's what the cost is. So, if you divide that up over that time frame, I did the math. Massachusetts probably has one of the biggest infrastructure and grids out of all the 7 states, or one of them. We're probably close. So our share of that through 2050 would probably be anywhere from $15 to $20 billion a year that we're going to have to fund these green mandates. This year's budget proposal is $60 billion. So just that alone would be a third of an entire budget for our state. It's just, I don't see how it works. I'm just going to go on and read a little bit more here. So although these organizations do support the goal of achieving a cleaner environment, which is something we all want. We don't want to be breathing in toxic chemicals. The report finds that switching primarily to weather-dependent renewable energy is not entirely feasible for the electrical grid of ISO New England, which is an independent not-for-profit corporation responsible for keeping electricity flowing across the 6 New England states. The study concludes that ISO New England may be unable to coordinate electricity to power the region within 11 years, warning that if each of the New England states adheres to the same renewable intensive path, a blackout scenario could possibly happen. According to the study, powering New England without interruption during a year in which wind and sunshine are plentiful would require 225 gigawatts of renewables, or equivalent to power generated by 12,000 wind turbines and 129 million solar panels. Even more renewables would be required to power New England in a less sunny or windy year. New England is only responsible for less than 0.4% of global emissions. It is unclear how much cleaner the environment will become in exchange for the costs that have been imposed on this region and its people. Ultimately, the report finds that the cost of reducing carbon dioxide emissions under these plans exceeds the benefits of doing so, especially because in many cases, green policies have been enacted without any effort to quantify the environmental benefits they will secure. This raises the very real possibility that New England states are imposing net harm on their economies by imposing policies whose costs outweigh their benefits. All right, I'd like to open it up to discussion. Questions? Pete?
Just, I want to build on some comments there. You know, we talk about the utility costs being out of control and how the governor, when we first went into this Mass Save Green Deal program that she's promoting, talked about the affordability to the residents here in Massachusetts. She wants to push everybody to electric, yet she's the one that approved a 30% increase in rate last year. So, do we just think everybody's stupid and we're just gonna sit and take it and not realize that the blame actually lands with her at a 30% increase? The reduction, like Mike said, is fictitious. I'll be truthful with you, I'd have more respect for the politicians if they'd actually come out and tell the truth, instead of trying to obfuscate and shine something up and push it off as a win. I'll give you an example. Mass Save budgeted $3 billion, which, if my homework was correct, the actual use of it was less than 800 million out of it that was budgeted. So we still have, what, a $2.2 billion amount that was budgeted that went unused? Yet the new ask for this year's budget was $5 billion. So we used 800 million. We had 3 billion budgeted, but this year we want to budget $5 billion for Mass Save? Okay, everybody's pissed off about the rates. So what does the governor do? Oh, we're gonna knock that number down. We just took off $500 million off of our budget for Mass Save. You still increased at $1.5 billion, a 50% increase, and you're expecting the residents to eat it. And again, the promotion is, oh, look what we did. We saved $500 million. No, you didn't. You spent another $1.5 billion that we can't afford. And in terms of the CO2 numbers that Mike mentioned, when was that study done, Mike? Do you have a date? I'm assuming it was before the last 5 or 6 weeks, right?
I don't have the entire study here. This is the condensed version of it, so I don't have the date on that.
Well, I know it's not brand new and it didn't just come out. But we all, if you pay attention, they came out and told us that the CO2 rates for humanity is actually overinflated because nobody factored in what algae adds to CO2 worldwide. And if I remember correctly, the estimates were supposed to be maybe 50% less. So if our number in New England is 0.04%, cut that in half. But we're all supposed to sit on rates that are skyrocketed by 30%, fees that are added on for hidden agendas like this Mass Green Save, Green New Deal. And on top of it, the infrastructure is not built to handle that gross increase to begin with. So what happens? Rolling blackouts that you have no control over, or you know what? Everything now is monitored, is computerized, so today you don't get to turn your power on. Today you can't charge your car that you were forced to buy. You know, Massachusetts was a blue state for how long, right? It's still a blue state. Personally, the only Democrat I voted for was Mark, who's not here. I wish he was. And that's only because I've got a relationship with Mark going back to the late 80s when he first started getting into the legislature. And I've actually seen some of the things that he's done. And it's not because I'm Republican, I'm independent. But you guys haven't made sense to me in multiple presidencies. And the fact that you can sit here and vote yourselves pay raises and throw that in the guise of COVID recovery, and sit here and continue to take away from the residents, including reductions in the aid that we get from the state while we pay more taxes. And let's talk about taxes. How are they going to pay for Mass Save and everything else? Proposed taxes on cable boxes now, on candy. A 2% increase in the state income tax. If you're making $60,000 as a family, that's $1,200 more a year. Do you honestly want to sit there and tell me that a family making $60,000 can afford $1,200? They can't afford $100. And it honestly seems like you guys are out of touch with what your residents and your constituency want. Because I watched the crap like last night, where you've got a president that's talking about doing things that the popular vote wants. And I see all the Democrats sitting back and refusing to give any recognition or any applause for what they want. Agendas that you guys backed until Trump took office, and then all of a sudden that was evil. So maybe they were going to take it a little easier on you guys tonight. I'm not. I don't think I should. I don't think anybody should. And you guys fairly new to the positions that you have,
3 months.
right? So I'm not going to hold it so much against you. But at some point, I'm going to tell you guys to grow a backbone and back what your constituents want and not what your party wants. All right, I yield the floor. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
It's okay. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, this is just a quick question, just for clarity, because I'm getting conflicting information. We all know DPU sets supply rates on electric and gas, but I'm getting conflicting information that the DPU also has to approve any Eversource requested delivery side increases. Can you guys confirm if that's true or not? And if it is, let's verify that that is the case.
Yeah, so what I can, and thank you, and I'll just say, the reason why we're here, Mr. Benoit, is to listen to our constituents.
And I
So-
appreciate it.
Yep, as we start the process, the budget process, the governor announced her House 1, which is her proposal that she submits to the legislature. She constitutionally is required to do that. The next step now is for the House to actually build our first budget. And constitutionally, it comes from the House first. Their first joint meeting of the House and Senate Ways and Means Committees is tomorrow, and there are going to be multiple joint meetings of House Ways and Means. The House will then put their budget together. There'll be a bunch of amendments. It'll then go to the Senate. Senate will do their budget. Then there'll be a conference committee, and then the final budget will go to the governor. So we're early stages. This is a great opportunity for us to have this conversation because we're at the beginning of our process. So I appreciate the feedback and certainly have some thoughts. Mr. Hinckley, to your question about how the rates are set, every 5 years the utilities are required to come in for a rate case, and they go to the Department of Public Utilities. You're right, the governor appoints all 3 of the commissioners. 2 are coterminous with the governor, so whoever the governor that comes in wins an election, they get to appoint 2 of the 3 commissioners. The other commissioner serves, there's I think it's a 3-year term, or it might be a 3-year term. Not more than 2 members can be of the same political party, so that's another requirement for the commission. They're what you call judicial adjudicatory commission, so they actually are the ones that set the rates, not the governor. The governor appoints them, but at the end of the day, it's after the rate cases are filed, there's what you call ex parte, which means you can't have conversations like the governor or legislators can say to the commission, we want you to do this. The importance is leading up to it and through filing testimony, that's what the DPU commissioners consider when they make the final determinations on all aspects of utility rates. I can tell you most of the calls, most of the emails that I've been getting, Mr. Chairman, have been about this very issue, about people's utility bills. And it runs the gamut. It's not just Democrats or Republicans or independents, it's everyone. People are struggling, and in January, when they got particularly their gas bill, but also their electric bill, people were really concerned about how they were going to make ends meet. So it is a real issue. It is a real issue that the legislature, I mean, and we're individuals, right? Both Steve and I are individual members. As soon as we get our own utility bills, but when we got complaints from people, we did what we could as legislators. So we both signed on to joint letters that requested that the DPU take action on particularly the delivery charge aspect, but more importantly, overall, the whole utility increase that has been impacting everyone. We also have signed on to joint letters asking the Attorney General to intervene as well, because the Attorney General has the Office of Ratepayer Advocate. The Ratepayer Advocate is an office created specifically to advocate for ratepayers before the DPU. In addition, I've co-sponsored, and I think my colleague is going to co-sponsor legislation in part. Senator Montigny filed legislation to create a commission, and I know we all get worried when we hear the word commission, but beginning and end date, clear time frame to get their work done. Senator Montigny's legislation is to focus on the delivery charge in particular, because that's where the biggest concern is for gas. And there are three different components to that, including Mass Save being one of them. And then Jeff Roy, who was the chairman of the Telecommunications Utility and Energy Committee, actually filed legislation that I co-sponsored that looks at the entire electrical system to understand how much the utilities are generating in revenue, to look at how rates are directly impacting people across the Commonwealth and what we can do about it. So there are things that can be done, but I mention all of this because the DPU process is also a slow process, and I think the legislature this session is going to have to look at ways to enable the DPU to be more responsive directly to ratepayers, as opposed to, like you said, giving some relief, but then recovering that relief a few months later. There needs to be mechanisms that allows the DPU to help people sooner rather than later. So there's got to be some short-term and some long-term efforts on this, and certainly glad to hear what other suggestions you have, but you're right, this is a major issue and it's not just residents. You represent the town of Acushnet. Town of Acushnet's utility costs have gone up as well, so there's more that needs to be done to address this issue for sure.
I mean, another thing that's concerning to me is the DPU commission, because I did a little background on each of them, and they all seem to be aligned with the governor's green agenda. So I kind of have a problem with that, because it's like, I just feel like the governor's policies are hell-bent on forcing people to go all green. Like, if you don't go green, then we're jacking up your rates and we're gonna make you pay more until you cave in, and then you're gonna go green, okay? That's the problem I have with this. Not everybody's home is conducive to putting solar panels on it, okay? I'd have to cut all the trees down around my property, which are beautiful and actually better for the environment than solar panels. I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to put solar panels on my house, okay? I have a perfectly working gas furnace that I heat my home with. I don't want to be forced to put heat pumps in my home. The reason Eversource can provide all these rebates for all this stuff is because everybody's paying for it, regardless of whether or not we're actually directly benefiting from it. I don't have a heat pump, I don't have an EV, I don't have solar panels. But guess what? I'm paying for all that stuff. And it's not right. I mean, it's basically, we're extorting money from all the consumers and residents in this Commonwealth. I mean, it's out of control. I mean, and it's all about, and this is really more about the governor. I mean, I know you guys are new, but her policies with this are going to bankrupt this state. And there's no way this is going to be sustainable for this long. There's no possible way. I just don't know where this goes at this point.
He brought up the green aspect of it, so let's throw out a couple other things. Already talked about the infrastructure can't handle everybody going green to begin with, and the investment that it would take to get the infrastructure there and the amount of years it would take doesn't meet her timeline to begin with. And at the end of the day, solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicles create more of a carbon footprint to create than the benefit of using them over their useful life. Now, maybe that'll change somewhere in the future, but don't sit here and try and feed us this line of crap that it's for the planet and it's a Green New Deal, and at the end of the day, you're spending more money doing that. And if you're trying to tell me that mining for the heavy metals and other items used for electric car batteries that you want to put everywhere, and then on top of it, the disposal isn't more destructive for the world than mining for coal or oil? I mean, please.
You know, and I'm not opposed to some of this stuff, but just don't shut off the spigot to fossil fuels, because a lot of people are dependent on heating their homes with gas and oil. You can't, it's unrealistic to expect everybody to just switch to all electric. I mean, it's insane to me.
Well, it's
Okay.
convenient when you take the choice away from your residents and force them to go one direction, and now that one direction sets the rates for the power that you have to buy from if you want to run anything electric. You don't see the conflict of interest there? You're creating a monopoly on energy and taking away any choice from the residents by passing the legislation that you do about the direction the state has to take.
Well, we haven't done that yet, because obviously there'd be some considerations. I just want to make sure you understand some of the pointers Mark did. So I had talked to you previously after we had a meeting about the electric situation. So like Representative Sylvia said, we already sent 2 letters to DPU with our concerns. One was a few weeks after we were on, and the second one was by Cabral, a little more aggressive a week ago. Well, not a week ago, a couple of weeks ago. And yesterday, DPU came before us at the State House to explain more to us. And then they said they have a little surprise coming that'll be good for our customers in a week that they didn't want to elaborate on. So hopefully something good's going to come up next week. But I just want you folks to know, because we're kind of taking a beating on this, that we did everything we could right away, did a follow-up, and we met with DPU saying our concerns yesterday, and it was a closed room where we could be very frank with them, so they understand where we're coming from. So don't think that nothing is being done. I want you to know.
Again, this is more about directed directly to the governor. I mean,
Understood, but we keep hearing you guys, we haven't done a vote on that yet, so.
I'm directing all my stuff towards the governor.
Yeah.
Because she's the boss of the state, she runs the state, right? So this is all directed at her.
Yeah.
And it's very concerning, because this kind of stuff can really hamstring a state budget when you're all in on this kind of stuff. And then what worries me, as a resident and a representative of this town, is how this and other things that I'll bring up in a little while can affect local aid. I mean, it's a big deal. And the other thing that's concerning is, you know, the governor bragged about, yeah, I shut down 2 gas pipelines. Good for you. So thankfully, we're going to become energy independent again in a short period of time. We'll be domestically producing more gas, oil than we have the last 4 years. Basically, everything was shut the last 4 years. There was little opportunity to do that. So if we have the opportunity to open up some gas pipelines in our state, how is that going to play out? How would a potential vote on that go? Because that could potentially lower rates for everybody if we have access to that. But if we're going to continue to just not allow it, and it's right here in the governor's press release that they're proud of promoting non-gas heating. It's all in here. I mean, I could read the whole thing, but I'm not gonna. And anybody can get this on mass.gov, press release from November 2024 about the climate law and everything that's in it. It's eye-opening, and I hope people out there are watching this and do a little homework and research, because it's troubling.
Yeah, if I can just say one thing, just from my own previous experience, and I can say gas pipeline has been an issue. It's not just during the Healy administration, during the Patrick administration when I served, it was an issue, but it was an issue for the cities and towns that did not want to have gas pipelines sited in their communities. So I think the bigger challenge we have is no matter what the solution is, whether it's all of the above, and it's a combination of renewable energy and fossil fuels, whether it's focusing primarily on renewable energy or just on fossil fuels, there are consequences to all the choices that we make. And I think that's the most important thing that we all have to understand is no matter what we decide to do, there are going to be consequences, because energy, how we produce energy, how we store energy, has different consequences depending on the type of technology that you use. And so that's what we wrestle with as policymakers. But I will say, as it relates to gas pipelines, so we're at the end of the pipeline in New England. We don't really have any of our own indigenous fuel, not like down in Pennsylvania or in other parts of the United States. And so the only way we get gas is through pipelines or LNG, right? LNG comes in through
That's where I was
ports.
going next.
Yeah, and so there are choices with that, right? So there are choices. If we bring more gas pipeline in, it has to go through communities, and ultimately it's the federal government, if it's an interstate pipeline, that has jurisdiction and makes those decisions. So FERC would oversee the whole issue of expansion. So that was what was going to happen in the mid-2000s. They were going to extend a pipeline all the way through Western Mass and bring it all the way into Eastern Mass, and the communities fought it tooth and nail. The towns and cities like Acushnet did not want to have gas pipelines extended in their communities. So I only mention that because there is, any solution that we pursue has impacts. And so it's not as simple as saying we want to bring gas because communities don't want them in their towns, and I can understand that. And from an LNG perspective, the same thing, because you're going to have to, you're going to have more LNG tanks, storage tanks, and communities don't necessarily want that. So I just mentioned that to level set that there are a lot of choices that we have to make, and none are simple. If they were, we would have already figured that all out.
Yeah, the problem though is it's not presented like there's any choice to make. We're already being told this is what you're going to do. So if the leadership is going to sit there and say this is what you're going to do, it's hard for us to sit back and say, well, we've got choices, because realistically you don't. If you're going to sit and research it and come up with options, yes. But until you guys are willing to get a backbone and go against your party and do what's right for your constituents, the residents of this state, and what possibly a Republican program might be, there's never going to be a change. It's all word of mouth.
Well, we just said one of the communities didn't want it is Acushnet.
Yeah.
They didn't want the gas. Now we're talking about why the state doesn't want it.
Tanks here in town.
Yeah, and we also had a whole town blow up because of gas,
Yeah.
and that was a concern to towns. It raised a lot more.
So mid-2000s,
concerns.
you're talking 20 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. So that's
People
20
don't
years
forget when a
ago.
whole town blows up. And like I said, the schools would be burning a lot cleaner. It'd be a lot cheaper to the taxpayers if you had gas going there. We could have went modular boilers instead of humongous oil fired.
Yep.
So that's what I'm saying. And Mark kind of elaborated on it. Communities are concerned, which he said they should be.
But again, you're bringing up something from 20 years ago.
You want gas next week? The best high school, past the schools, we can probably work for it. You don't want it.
Kevin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So we can sit here and beat ourselves up about whether we're gonna go all solar, all windmill, all green. It's a green new scam. There's benefits to going green in certain aspects of generating a certain level of power from green, but nobody, whether you're Democrat or Republican, should be telling anybody this is, as the governor's trying to do, is saying we're gonna get rid of your gas appliances. We're getting rid of gas completely, right? The ultimate solution to the problem is a combination of everything, right? And stop the madness when we say the carbon footprint and everything else. When John Kerry's flying around in his jet as the energy secretary across the globe, he's dropping more carbon out of that jet than any fossil fuels producing, burning, creating energy. So people's jets are dropping way more carbon. And if anybody ever did a real study on the carbon footprint, right, and the earth temperature that we all claim we're burning up for climate, right? It's a bunch of crock of crap, right? So if somebody actually did a scientific study on if we turn everything to solar, everything to wind, what would our temperature cool off? It would probably be 1 degree. So there's plenty of studies out there, and you can go talk to a lot of smart people. I've talked to some people. If we want to call them smart, we can, but let's not fool ourselves, not try to put a trophy on anybody's desk about look at what the initiative we did. We created a Green New Deal, and we're forcing things down your throat. The best solution to the problem is a combination of everything, right? And by the time we get to this fancy solar panel that creates more juice out of a solar panel. Oil companies, fossil fuel companies, including natural gas. Natural gas is very clean burning fuel, first of all. It's one of the cleanest burning fuels outside of propane. The reality of it is they're already working on carbon capture right from the fossil fuel plant, doing this stuff, burning this stuff off, right? So they would produce a very little carbon footprint on that by carbon capture. So we're gonna force everything, as everybody's saying, down people's throats. But ultimately, I think the best way to approach it is a balance of everything, not just one thing. You'll find that if you try to do one thing, you're gonna get this kind of a attitude multiplied by hundreds of millions of people, right? That's what it's gonna come down to, because people just can't afford to continue having their taxes raised, the utility bills raised. So I would suggest, as new members, that you in the House, that you figure out what you're gonna do, and when you have a conversation with your members, you just say, hey, let's take a more balanced approach to it. Don't just drop the gauntlet and say, we're going solar, we're doing windmills out in the ocean that are gonna kill the whales, because by the time those things get up and running, the amount of oil that windmill's gonna drop into that ocean is gonna start killing sea animals, just so you know. That was a horrible idea, whoever came up with that idea, but we're stuck with that too, right? So, you know, we can go green, it's great for the earth, but let's be realistic about what we're doing when we go green. Like I said, a combination of everything is probably the best outcome for everybody and the most affordable, right? We never had these kind of bills until we started going green.
I've already said publicly that
I can show you my electric bills, Mr. Hollat, from 1998, when they weren't even charging the delivery charge, okay? It's all a crock of shit. Everybody's trying to make more and more money to scam Wall Street, because that's what it really comes down to. The utility companies is profits on Wall Street, right? So I think we all just need to be adults and sit there and say, when we're trying to make policy decisions, let's try to figure out the right policy that benefits the constituents that you represent, right? Because you're there for 2 years. Keep that in mind. So if you're not making the right decisions and you're casting votes that are throwing taxpayer dollars one direction and stuffing things down people's throats, how long do you really think you're gonna be in office, right? If you can demonstrate to your constituents that you're working your hardest on behalf of them and casting your votes that's benefiting them, you'll probably be okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
David?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard, I think a lot on green energy, but I just want to just share, set the tone for why this is actually an appropriate meeting convened by the Finance Committee, and it's the story of Acushnet's financial situation. And I've talked to Representative Sylvia about this, of incentivizing towns to have strong fiscal management, right? Acushnet has the highest bond rating you can get. We have not had any overrides, or even consideration of an override. Our tax collections are almost in the upper, right, we're up in the upper 90% of tax collection. So our taxpayers show up 4 times a year to pay their bills on time, right? We get consistent clean audits. Heck, the residents even voted for the Community Preservation Act to raise their taxes because they know that that's the good thing for the town. And so ask that while you take into account people's utility bills, but look at how you can reward the property taxpayer in a town whose leaders, not the board, so I'm not gonna pump our own tires, but the Finance Committee, who are doing the right thing for their residents. And renters in this Commonwealth get a tax credit, which is awesome, right? It's up to $4,000, 50%. But if the towns are doing the right thing, is there a way we can provide a tax credit for the property taxpayer, right? We're always talking about housing shortage. We want home ownership. So a town like Acushnet, who have all the fundamentals in place, doing the right thing, still feel like we're getting squeezed. We've talked to Rep. Sylvia. We're not a rural community. That doesn't even make any sense, right?
Yep.
A rural, that might be a low-key thing, but it could provide a great deal of benefits. We're not a gateway city, but we're on the border of a gateway city. So Acushnet, we like this middle child that's kind of not getting all the attention and needs the attention, but get rewarded for doing the right things. And I think that's why you see the level of angst and frustration, not only from the volunteers, but the ones who run for office. We're going through our budget cycle now. We're looking at how we can consolidate positions or possibly eliminate a position just to carry out core services, and all of these external pressures could get in the way of some really important projects. You know, we've got a vocational school that is looking to be, you know, a new vocational school. There's needs at the school, in the school department, but you can only, you know, you can only squeeze so hard. So that's my message to you, you know, is that consider how you can reward the municipalities who are doing all the right things. I mean, you've got some towns, the municipalities are doing some terrible things. People are going to jail for, you know, misappropriating money or giving sweetheart deals and terrible procurement. So that's what I'd ask, you know, if you hear anything from me tonight, it's how you can reward the towns that are doing the right thing or trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and through you, Mr. Chairman. I have had those conversations with Dave, and I did get a chance, and I know my colleague did too, to meet with Jamie Kelly to talk about where things are with the budget for this year. And I understand one of the biggest challenges for Acushnet is you're rural, but you're not rural in the definition of the state rural communities. Your tax base is 82, 83, 84, 85% residential. And so your rent, 88. So 88% is residential, which has an enormous impact on the people that live in your community. And there is not much of a commercial or an industrial base, and it's not something that you can just snap a finger and it happens tomorrow. And so thinking in terms of being creative is something that I certainly, and I won't speak for both of us, but that we'll continue to try and find those opportunities. We're gonna have the Director of Rural Affairs for the state come to Acushnet. She's touring the other communities in my district that are actually meet the definition of rural. But based on the conversation I had with Dave and with Jamie, I asked her if she would come to Acushnet, sit down with local officials and talk about the issues that the town has to see if there are any opportunities for us to work together to provide more support to the town of Acushnet. So we'll keep thinking creatively. There's a bigger conversation to have certainly at the state level too in terms of state aid and how we can support rural communities in the future. So you certainly have that commitment from me and from Steve.
Change the quota from 10,000 to 11,000, we're in.
Well,
It's
10,633.
8,000.
Huh?
It's 8,000.
It's
Population
8,000?
is 8,000.
Change it to 12.
But again,
Give
like,
us some room for
but
growth.
honestly, like, my grandmother's from Acushnet, my mother grew up in Acushnet. I spent a lot of time as a kid here in Acushnet. It's always been a rural community to me. It still seems like a rural community to me as your state representative. So the population, you know, I know you have to have a cutoff, but there have to be other factors like you talked about that make a community rural that aren't just 8,000 population or whatever the square mile density is.
Similar problem in Westport, same thing. And probably Freetown.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on this finance committee for 19 years. I've been chair, I think, the last 4 or 5. And it's, the last 4 years have been brutal. I mean, it was bad. And look, you know, it was during the Biden administration. I'm gonna just come out and say it. Policies affect, federal policies trickle down to state, and then it trickles down to us at local levels. And we are really struggling. And the thing that's troubling to me is this trend of other municipalities throughout the Commonwealth resorting to Proposition 2.5 tax overrides to fund their operational budgets. We've never done that. I never want to see us doing that as long as I'm on this finance committee. But that's becoming way too commonplace. So what does that tell me? Why is that happening? So it's problems above us that lead to this. So that needs to be figured out. You know, is it purely a spending issue, lack of revenue? It's a combination of things, but something needs to be figured out because a lot of these policies are really hitting the working middle class the most out of everybody. You know, the people in the millionaires category, they can absorb, you know, these increases in their utility bills. Not as bad for them. And then the people on the lower side, they're getting help, and that's fine. They need help. Okay, I get it. But it's the working middle class that are really taking the hit, the biggest. So that's the problem I have. I think we can move on from the utility stuff and the green mandates.
I think we have a little bit.
Yeah.
All right.
So let's move on to that. I want to condense let's see, 2, 3, and 4 all together, so we can just get, move on here. So the governor's FY '26 budget proposal, potential proposed tax increases, and then local aid. So I believe the governor's budget proposal for FY '26 is around $61.5 billion, right? And I know there was just another $425 million supplemental bill, I guess, passed through the House to continue to pay for illegal migrants and shelters, which are only going to cover us from February through June. I just want to know when is this stuff going to end? Because the cost of illegal immigration in our state has been a tremendous burden on our taxpayers for the last several years, at the tune of, I don't know, $2 billion plus. And then another $1.8 billion is going to be requested for FY '25 and '26. We've been a direct pipeline from the wide open southern border right here for the past 4 years. And it's just placing a tremendous economic burden on our taxpayers, and also on our public schools. The public education costs are tremendous due to illegal immigration. Healthcare, public safety. It costs $27 million per year in the state of Massachusetts for incarcerating illegal alien criminals. Now, thankfully, that's going to go away pretty soon because these guys are going back to where they came from. But all this stuff is very challenging to quantify. And our taxpayers have been paying for free food, housing, transportation, healthcare, cash welfare payments, plane rides, phones, etc. And it's the working middle class that are bearing the brunt of all this. And I just don't know how it can continue. I'm appreciative that Senator Montigny voted no on this. People have to start stepping up and saying no. You can't just say yes to whatever the governor wants. This is pure insanity. Here's an article from the Fall River Reporter. This is from September 2024. Massachusetts spending over $15,000 per month per family on migrant housing and transportation. Mass Republicans demanding transparency from the Healy administration over migrant spending. But they couldn't get it, so they were getting fought on that. It's just, this is an eye-opening study right here. So this is from the Center for Immigration Studies, CIS.org. Now, this is a very in-depth study. I'm not going to read a lot from here. But if anybody wants some good reading, go to CIS.org, Center for Immigration Studies, Massachusetts, a case study in mass immigration and the welfare state. There's some great information here. It's really eye-opening. Here's an excerpt right here. The cost of Massachusetts taxpayers of temporary housing and shelters is enormous, but it pales in comparison to the cost that will accumulate in the future if those in the temporary shelters today remain in the Commonwealth for the long term. Illegal immigration has a negative fiscal impact overall. Numerous studies and government reports have shown that illegal immigration is a burden on taxpayers. On average, illegal immigrants pay less in taxes than they consume in welfare benefits and other social services. It doesn't end. So,
It's interesting. I didn't hear that the governor wants to raise taxes by 2%. One, because I'm a tax accountant, it's tax season.
3% if you're self-employed.
But, so the thing is we already raised the taxes, right? There's the mass millionaires tax that went up 4%. Where's that, 3 years ago? Where did that money go?
When we voted it as a referendum,
Yep.
it's going to either education or transportation.
And then, thank you, because that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
We haven't seen it in education, right? And here's the thing. I don't know how much we collected, but what I do is I'm an individual tax accountant.
Yeah.
My clients are paying the mass millionaires tax. I see it, and it's a significant number.
Yeah.
And I was hoping I would see some of it here in the town for our schools, because it's one way we can help balance the budget. We could get more of that money, but we're not getting it. So where is this money going then if it's earmarked for education?
Yeah, so, go ahead.
I just want to add a little context to that too, because we're talking about Chapter 70 at this point. And Acushnet is deemed what they call a hold harmless community because the state feels that the community is affluent enough to support the schools.
Yep.
So it
That's the
goes
next
to
point.
other communities. So I
That's
just
the
want to
next point.
piggyback on that and understand that just because property values dictate Acushnet might be comfortable, when the schools take up over 50% of the budget, it's really hard to have absolute bare minimum Chapter 70 state aid going to our schools.
But how are we deemed to be affluent enough to support it, right? Because that's my struggle. I don't understand that piece
Property
of it.
values. Yeah.
But
The formula for Chapter 70 is broken.
that's my point, right? Like at one point, it has something to do with how much taxes people pay in the 02743 zip code, right? Like,
Per capita income.
okay, I've lived in the same house for close to 30 years. When I started working the job that I have and what I do today, my salary and not even in the same ballpark, okay? But it's the same house. So I'm not sure how that is an appropriate calculation. Do you see what I'm saying? So, like, I struggle because I see everybody needs, right? The police need, the school needs, the DPW needs, everybody needs, you know? But I can't sit here and, you know, support something that's gonna cost our residents so much money that they won't be able to afford their real estate taxes. Or the decision is, do I put food on the table or do I pay the bill? I can't get to that.
Well,
I
that's-
struggle with that.
That's the other part too, is because the governor has come out and pushed some of the tax burden back onto the towns. And how do they tell you to collect more taxes? Raise your property tax rate. We just went through a 5-year reevaluation of our property values to begin with. So it's easy to say, well, the property values are high, so you guys can afford it. Oh, but by the way, you're gonna pay more taxes on your property that we're raising the value of on anyway, just to cover the costs for the less of the state aid we're gonna give you.
Kevin, go ahead.
So, do you want me to try to answer a question about the millionaire's tax?
I can answer what I know, and we can provide you with more information about how it was spent in '24, because there's a breakdown. The state, the governor's office has a breakdown of how fair share was paid in 2024. In 2025, it also included free community college. So, free community college, I think, was about $117 million of the fair share tax that went to that. But by law, what we voted when we voted for the fair share is that it had to go to education, it had to go to transportation. Early childhood education is a primary focus, but also colleges and universities and other programs for education. And then transportation, I know the governor has proposed in her House 1 budget to take an amount of that fair sharing to communities in the form of additional Chapter 90 money. So she wants to boost Chapter 90 distribution to cities and towns, and one of the ways that she's proposing to do that is with fair share. So that, I'm just
But-
telling
but
you.
would we even qualify for any of that boost?
Yes.
You already got a letter for $500,000.
Now, keep in mind, and the additional money has to be
It has to
approved
be
through
voted
the
and
process.
But you already received the letter. The town
That
has.
would come in,
It's in the form of,
Mr. Chairman, so to try to help Ms. Delgado about what happened last year with the millionaire's tax with the town of Acushnet, we received $172,000 in Fair Share Act, and it was for to supplement Chapter 90. There was nothing mentioned in the letter about education and early education, so that might be an add-on to something that they're looking to do. If it was part of last year, it wasn't any letter to us, but we
It
did.
wasn't direct, Selectman Gaspard to the town of Acushnet, that's programs across the state. So the fair share money is for programs
Okay,
across the
so,
state.
so we received $172,000 last year. We actually went to town meeting to be able to expend that like we expend from the approval from the Board of Selectmen. The problem with the millionaire's tax is what a lot of other states have done is, Ms. Delgado, you probably know this better because you have a lot more conversations with them than I do, even though I have some wealthy friends, is keep taxing me like you're gonna and I'm gonna move out of the state, and that's
they
what's
have
happening.
moved out.
And that's what's happening to other states, right? You're gonna see a mass exodus of the people who are job creators, and you're gonna lose those people in the Commonwealth. So you're gonna be very careful of how much you're gonna stop paying people on top of what they're already paying, right? And that's sometimes the problem with elected officials is they think the simple answer is just tax them more. Give them another reason to raise a tax, right? And excise tax is being discussed now. Let's move that up. Let's not do the 6-year sliding scale. Let them give a few more percentages out of that, see what they can accrue off of that. The answer to our financial problems isn't raising more revenue per se outside of what we already do. In my opinion, we raise a decent amount of revenue every year. It's the cost of everything that we're paying for that's killing us, right? We see it with labor right now. You can't find people to work, right? I don't have the answer to that. COVID came and something happened and poof, everybody went away and we don't have workers anymore. I've never seen anything like it quite in my life, right? But it's a problem. Labor's a significant problem, right? Benefits, significant problem, especially for municipalities. These pensions, where I know he's gonna get to that, but all these things have been promised back in the promised land days, and it's because we couldn't, in the world wars, we couldn't afford to pay, so they said, well, we'll give you a little bit better benefits so that when you retire, you'll be all set. And the system's stuck, and then the next thing you know, in the 70s, everybody else said, hey, we want a part of that system, that's really good. And that's how we got into that problem. I know that's for a later topic, but as far as fair share goes, and I'm not so sure that we got an additional $510,000 on top of our normal chapter 90 monies. The town of Acushnet receives roughly $315,000 a year, Mr. Olet. So I'm not sure you're giving us 800 and change this year. I do have a copy of the letter in my phone.
There you go,
Look
so
at it
you
when
can see
other
it for
people-
yourself, yeah.
When other people, I've already read it, but you said an additional
I believe it's additional, don't you?
$800,000.
Maybe Mr. Kelly?
$500,000. It's not an additional $500,000.
They raised it to
It looks like
Yes,
it's
raised
gonna be
it.
an additional
Okay, maybe I
$200,000.
misspoke, okay. I
So
just
my
know it's a half
question would
mil.
be is, are you manipulating that and saying, we're gonna give you an additional $200,000 in chapter 90 and this pretty little letter that we just sent to you, and we're not getting anything from fair share? Is that just a compliment, or is that fair share added to the regular general? Are we getting the $200 extra $1,000 plus our fair share money?
So because it's still fluid, the governor, when she gave her state of the state address, she also referenced the transportation bond initiative that she is going to file. Of course, it requires the legislature to vote it, to approve it, but it's her proposal. As part of that, she had proposed to increase over the next 5 years, Chapter 90 dollars directly to cities and towns for the next 5 years, using fair share dollars to do it, by leveraging that fair share money to borrow additional funds to provide more transportation money. That's her proposal.
So she's taking.
Again, it's still fluid, right? Because we haven't voted on anything yet. So I think what Representative Willett was indicating is that there is a proposal from her to increase Chapter 90 money using some of that fair share money because it's supposed to be used for transportation, so.
Right.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So while you just said a key word, transportation bond, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so while we're on that subject matter, the town of Acushnet has asked our previous state reps, Mr. Strauss and Mr. Schmid, and Mr. Matigny sent letters on behalf of the town of Acushnet for $1.5 million in a transportation bond bill that was proposed to us and supposedly gonna be given to us in 2014 for Slocum Street.
Yes, I'm in conversations. I've asked Mr. Kelly to provide me with the information so that I can send a similar
He
request.
brought it to my attention in a separate meeting
So
too.
construction of that project's gonna start in less than 30 days. So it would be nice to see how fast you could expedite that, because I do know that both of you gentlemen voted the $425 million for illegal immigrant sheltering.
So,
And I would hope that it takes precedence, your constituency first would take precedence over that bill.
So, yeah, I'm happy to talk about why I voted for the emergency assistance bill, but I'm not sure if I'm happy to do it.
Sure.
Okay, so, and I don't have to speak for both of us, I'll speak for myself and you can speak for yourself as well. So, I've been in the legislature now for 3 months, and the governor in January filed a request for supplemental funding to fund the Emergency Assistance Program, which is a long-term program that's been in existence for decades in Massachusetts. It services veterans, children, families, and yes, immigrants who are here legally and have resident status. Problem is, they were gonna run out of money. Was I happy that I had to vote on that? Absolutely not. Did I want one of my first votes as a state representative to be on supplemental funding for emergency funds? No. But the alternative was, and I spent the time really trying to understand how this all was going to work, and the fact that there are all these new conditions in place, I wouldn't have supported it if they didn't have the conditions that were put in place in this session at that formal, if they didn't include the Corey background checks, that they didn't reduce the total number of families in there between now and the end of the year, and some of the other requirements that they had, because they needed to be included. But the alternative was to just throw people out on the streets. More than close to 50% of the people that utilize those emergency assistance services are longtime Massachusetts residents. And so I couldn't in good conscience vote for something that was just going to, in essence, if we didn't fund it, throw people out into the streets. The residency requirement was an important one for me. So those are the reasons why you have to, when you have these opportunities to vote, you have to really think hard and make what you think is the right decision. And that was the right decision for me to make on behalf of my constituents. Was I happy that I had to do that? Absolutely not. Do I wish that either we didn't have to vote on that or that the issue was resolved previously? Sure. But that's not why I ran for state representative, to make easy decisions. And Mr. Gaspar, the priority for me, I see a state rep has 3 responsibilities. First and foremost is to advocate for your constituents and your municipalities. I'm a former town manager, I'm the moderator in Fairhaven, a former school committee member, I get it. And every day I'm thinking of ways to try and help this community and the other 5 communities that I represent to get them what they deserve so that they can provide services to their communities. And so I appreciate we're having this conversation and we keep kind of going back to some of these issues like immigration, and that's fine. I'm here to dig in with you for the next 2 years, and if I don't get reelected, I don't get reelected, but for the next 2 years, I want to be the best state rep that I can be, and that is to fight for the 6 communities that I represent. And I appreciate the feedback that I'm getting because that's helpful as we go through the budget process. And I hope we can continue to have this conversation ongoing for the next 2 years.
And I'll elaborate a little.
Thank you, Mr. Sylvia, for that, note on that and why you took that vote. It's just, you have to look at it from how we look at it.
100%.
Right, and when we read things and we see the roll call vote and we see your name up there and we're sitting there waiting for $1.5 million from 2014, right? You can see where it would seem
100%.
hurtful that we're not being, thought of first, right?
Yep.
So hopefully we're gonna get that check to you in a timely manner, because we just started working on it, we just found out like a week ago, so we got our people working on it. Just a little bit more to piggyback on what Mark said. I took the whole thing into picture. I'm multiple selectmen in Westport, as you know. So my whole thing was, we kind of have minimal impact of the immigrants on the South Coast. And part of the argument for this money was to keep them where they are now. Let's keep things going. They needed it to the end of the fiscal cycle. We have a caucus. We're all in a room like this. Yes, the Democrats. And we discussed it in detail. Towns came up to us and said, hey, look, do me a favor. We didn't want the immigrants in our town, but look, they're in our schools, there's families, they're just gonna, what are they gonna be, all over, and they could infiltrate to the South Coast. They're just gonna be loose, if you will, around the state. So a lot of these communities said, do us a favor, where they are, this money will help us keep them where they are, keep them in the schools, at least for the school year. That's why, as you know, the school year ends at the end of the fiscal year. And that was another part of the decision. You gotta look at the whole totality. I do not support sanctuary cities. I would not have supported the illegal immigrants, but we have the right to shelter law, which I had nothing to do with, and we have to take the whole thing into consideration. Worst thing I personally would like to see is there's a certain group that stick up for people that their rights are taken, and these people get in lawsuits and ended up with millions of dollars. That would only make it worse, and it's happened before in certain cases. So, again, what Mark said is true, and that's a little bit more of the rest of the story. I'm concerned because we kind of have minimal impact here on the South Coast. We have homelessness, but we don't really have the influx of the migrants. And these other cities said, hey, do us a favor, we'll live with it for now.
That's the problem with immigration, right? Is we should be taking care of our people first.
Amen.
And then when we take care of our people, then I think a lot of us would say, you know what else can we do for others now, right? But when we're struggling, I think that's the conversation at the table. When Americans are struggling and we're seeing billions of dollars being funneled to people that came over that border illegally, right? That hurts. And I think that's what angers a lot of us, right? I think if we were all in a good place and we had our veterans in good homes and we didn't have a homeless problem and everybody was being taken care of, and we could all sit back and say, you know what? We got a surplus. What could we do for the better good of people, humanity, right? That's our time to do something like that and shine, right? And ain't put that before this, right? I don't like when the cart goes before the horse.
It's not, it's not our financial responsibility to take care of individuals who decided to break the law and cross our border and come here illegally. That's pretty much the premise of this and the bottom line. And the fact that we're a sanctuary state, and yes, we have a right to shelter law, well, what can we do about that? How can we change that? Because that would solve a lot of these problems as far as where do we put all these people? Because these shelters are not just for legal residents. They've been housing, and look, we've had illegal immigrants all over the state in hotels, motels, everywhere. I mean, it's insane. And I blame the governor for this. It's her policies that led to this, basically inviting it, okay? And then we bear the brunt of it. We're paying the price, the middle class. And that $425 million bill that just passed, it passed, but it's going to allow out-of-state people and people from out of the country to still come here.
It's not the
No,
way
it's
we
not.
voted it.
You have to be a resident.
You have to be a resident in Massachusetts. That's the amendments, one of the amendments we made that he spoke of.
That's not what I saw.
Yeah, you have to be a resident.
What's that requirement exactly?
Well, there's two things, right? So if you're an immigrant who is seeking asylum and you're federally recognized as doing that in the United States, you're a resident of the United States. And so if you come to
That's the legal way.
yeah, and if you come to Massachusetts and you're a resident seeking asylum, you need emergency shelter, you would qualify, just like a Massachusetts resident who's been here for 20 years, 30 years. That's the change that we made this session, was that it had to be residents. You have to prove residency, so there's a whole requirement for proving residency. There's a Corey check requirement. So there are a number of things that.
Is that new? 'Cause
Yes, we
did that. That's what we
just
voted
passed,
for.
that within that,
We had drug dealers and
Yeah,
weapons.
that's what the
and-
Corey was for.
Yeah,
That was just, that was,
a Corey check is not as
Yes.
strong as a federal background check. Phil, you can probably answer that better.
Yeah, probation.
Yeah.
I mean, because how
You need
many
a conviction on a quarry, probably, that's the thing.
I mean, how many sexual assault cases happen in these shelters committed by illegal immigrants? I mean, it's appalling.
Unfortunately, Americans do, but it's something we gotta deal with. It's true.
so here's my question, and I appreciate you.
I'm always going to be honest with you.
No,
and
I appreciate the detailing of the
Yep.
425 million, and here's a question, and to be truthful with you,
Sure.
I don't expect an answer, but it's something I want you to certainly consider. That $425 million that you voted yes for was also on top of another $500 million that was voted only a few months earlier. It's not sustainable,
Mhm.
right? So how are you planning on changing your behavior moving forward? Because it's not sustainable.
Yeah. So
And again, I don't expect.
those are great. Those are great questions. So a couple of things. So for the next fiscal year, that's part of the budget process, right? And I think that the House Chair of Ways and Means and the Senate Chair of Ways and Means have made it very clear that from their perspective, and part of the reason why they put all these new reporting requirements in place with the vote that we took, so that can inform how the legislature decides to fund the program for the next year, the emergency assistance program for the next year. They've also capped the number of individuals that can be in the shelters, right? So there's a number of things that they've done. The amount of time has been restricted to 6 months. And so they put in place, they meaning the House and Senate Ways and Means committees that then recommended it to the full legislature, to put all of those in place, including reporting requirements, which, by the way, the Senate put some additional reporting requirements into it to inform the process moving forward. I mean, I can tell you,
We have to revote.
just from my experience, and probably yours as well, Steve, is that moving forward, we need to have real eyes on this to make sure that we don't fall into the same circumstance again that we did, because it isn't sustainable. And again, to your point, could we have used that 425, it's one-time money, but could we have used it for things that would benefit our
Absolutely.
communities?
Mhm.
Sure.
Absolutely.
We only
Yes.
want
Absolutely.
1.5 million
Yeah.
of the
I
425.
got you.
I hear your message, I'm happy you're both working on
I
it.
just want to give her a chance to speak. Kristen, go ahead.
Hi, I appreciate you explaining the thought process and why you voted for
Yeah.
that, for the emergency assistance shelter. So that certainly, helps to explain things and also the safeguards put in place that you've described. However, I understand and I feel the same way. What has happened, and it sounds like you're trying to do things to prevent, a similar thing. So that's appreciated, speaking for myself. One thing I do want to talk about, and I think Mr. Gaspar and Mr. Hinckley touched on it, was some of the state aid to schools and how that, affects communities like Acushnet. And probably a lot of the other communities that you represent. 233 municipal districts are receiving the minimum hold harmless aid. I'm sure that's not news to you.
Yeah.
So that's a majority of our communities, right? There's 300 plus in the Commonwealth.
351.
Right. So a majority are receiving the minimum aid. And what that means for the town of Acushnet and for other towns is that in Acushnet, we are receiving an increase of only $84,825.
I saw that on the cherry sheet.
Right.
Yeah.
So those of us who are on school committees, have been on school committees, work in schools, we understand that while something is better than nothing, that's only 1.16%. And school budgets, like other aspects of the town budgets, are increasing by more than 3%, by more than what we can collect in property taxes, what we can get from the state. I know we don't, none of this is news to anyone. We talked about utilities, utility costs. Schools are big consumers of utilities, only because they're open a majority of the time. We serve a large population, and we have a lot of people in and out of our buildings every single day. And as time goes on, we're increasing the number of days that schools are open to fit the needs of our community. Before school hours, after school hours, summer school hours. So no longer are we just open 180 days, 7 hours a day. So we have that. We have the costs of salaries for our people. We're a heavy salary, about 70 to 80%. So in terms of that, your salaries are increasing by probably 4 to 5 to 6% a year. So I'll go back to that 84,000. That's not going to cut it. Transportation expenditures. You have transportation companies. They're very few and far between. So they are naming their prices, and they're quite expensive. Tuitions for students that go out of our district, not necessarily to the high schools, but we are in Acushnet, we do have to pay for our students to go to other high schools. That's something that's not under our control, that we can control that cost. But out of district tuitions, the state voted, the OSD, the Occupational Services Division, said you can raise private school tuitions, private special education tuitions, by 3.67% this year. A few years ago it was 14%. So it's really hard when we have just that minimum aid. And I know Mr. Gaspar and Mr. Hinckley, we said Chapter 70 is broken. We've been hearing that for years. There have been efforts to increase it, to increase inflation, to increase some of the foundation enrollment categories. But yet it's still, other than 2 years ago, I think it still hasn't helped the town of Acushnet, and it probably hasn't helped many of our local communities. So I guess what we struggle here is, in Acushnet, our budgets are increasing by 2, 3, 4%, just to maintain level services. We're not talking about anything extra fancy, just to maintain level services. The town revenue prediction is slightly more increase than what that level of increase in just the school's budget would be. But the town has to service everyone, all of the other departments, and the pension costs and everything else that we talk about. So I guess insurance, right. So I guess, I don't know that it's really a question, because it's a question that we've been trying to, all of us have been trying to answer for a long time. It's just a comment or a thought that, what can we do going forward to help the schools and the towns, because the schools are about 50% of the towns. And if the school is taking up a large portion of that increase, then it squeezes the town departments who are no less important. So I don't know if there's any discussion at the state level or what you all can do or what information you might need from us to try to get us out of this minimum aid, because again, it's 84,000, and that's, that's not a lot of money to help sustain
On that
K-12
subject,
education.
I need to disclose that I'm a temporary facilities director. I believe I'll be off your books. I gotta talk to the superintendent tomorrow. I'm reading to the kids tomorrow for reading week, and then I can dig deeper. I couldn't technically dig deeper because I was an employee of the Acushnet School Department, but that should be done. The same thing with Westboro Selectmen. I'm done April 8th, so all my other jobs are done and I can dig deeper. So right now, I can't dig deeper. Mark's been looking into it a little bit, but we can't really discuss it while I'm an employee, but that should be done this week.
I mean, and the only other thing I'll say is that last week when we voted on rules for the House and joint rules for the House and the Senate, we then formed our committees, so we each got named to committees. We couldn't get our committee assignments until we voted on the rules we voted on, and so committees are starting to organize. So on issues like utility issues, the legislature is going to act on that. The Telecommunication Utility and Energy Committee, which is now chaired by Mark Cusack in the House, the committee is now created, and obviously they're going to have to prioritize what issues they're going to be working on this session. Same thing with the Education Committee. Just for your edification, I was appointed to the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, which under its jurisdiction are things like water, wastewater, land preservation, coastal management, land use, state parks, and I was also named to the Labor and Workforce Development Joint Committee as well. There are two others that I'm on, but they're minor in comparison, and Steve, you can talk about yours. But that's where that work ultimately gets done, if there is going to be prioritization on anything. We did get a briefing from DESE last week to go through the funding formula and how things currently exist. I honestly don't know that there's going to be any movement on a change in formula, but I do think for people like me to advocate for the communities that I represent, to make sure other people are hearing exactly what that means, an $84,000 increase in your overall Chapter 70 funding is not going to do much of anything.
Right, and so what's happened over the years is that it shifted the balance of the state aid versus the local aid in schools from, it used to be maybe 52% state aid, 48% local. And now it's shifted the other way, and it seems to keep, putting more of the burden on the local districts.
So a higher percentage of net school spending is coming from...
I think part of the
Correct.
problem we school districts face as well is unfunded state mandates, correct? That's a big issue where the state legislature comes down with requirements without funding for these districts. So everybody's caught off guard, and it makes it very, very, very difficult, as you can see here, for us to come up with a balanced budget. There's so many unknowns within the school, and they take more than 50% of the town's budget. So it's...
I did want to say just one more thing about the millionaire's tax. I know you mentioned education, and right now, we haven't seen any in the local K-12 education that we're talking about. I know you mentioned preschool, which there is preschool, early childhood, and also community college.
Yeah, and
colleges.
And
that is wonderful. Funding for any education is wonderful. But here in Acushnet, we're a K-8 district, and also we do need some funds for K-12, but so that millionaire's tax sadly hasn't really trickled, other than in roads and in Chapter 90, hasn't trickled down, and I think it was, a lot of people were very hopeful that it was going to come and kind of be a little bit of a Band-Aid. So I don't know if there's anything in the works for that. But
We'll see if we can get that $1.5 million check, then the $500,000 check, and get you some school money. Okay, sounds good.
I'm new to this committee, but I also work for another municipality. I probably know more about their budget, honestly, right now than I do this budget.
What municipality?
Easton.
Okay.
And it's not just Acushnet, it's not just Easton, it's so many towns in this state are looking at basically two options. You're either gonna reduce services significantly, or you're gonna go for overrides. And
those aren't passing.
They're
That
not.
exclusion maybe, but not an override.
So, yeah, an operational override's extremely hard to pass, and we're obviously handcuffed, if you will, by Prop 2.5 new growth. When fixed costs are going up double-digit percentages, it's just killing the towns, and I would just ask that, minimum aid for students, unrestricted, state aid, I think is our second biggest revenue source. For my town budget, where I work, I'm not sure what it is here, it's probably similar. Pre-08 recession, unrestricted aid was 23% of our town budget and town revenue, and now it's down to 17-ish. I mean, that's $7 million in the town I work. So with state aid going up 1 to 2% when budgets and costs are going up 3 to 4, it's really killing us. And then it just becomes we're going backwards, unfortunately, or we're asking for overrides, which I don't think this town has the appetite for.
Well, that's part of our argument too, is if we're given a big chunk of change to help the situation, that we expect a little bit of help, and we've got that little bone that we're talking about with the $500,000, but we expect more. So let us keep digging.
All right, please.
Yeah, so I just want to finish what we were talking about before. You were talking about residencies as one of the prerequisites for the emergency housing aid. But you also mentioned that if you are considered someone seeking asylum in the United States as a whole,
Legally a resident.
then you're considered a resident. So theoretically, you could have people coming from other parts of the country that hold that status to Massachusetts looking for help.
Right.
So let me just finish. So the fact that our governor has the stance that she currently has on working with the federal government in terms of illegal immigrants in our state, or not working, I should say, with the federal government, it makes us a lot more attractive for anyone around the country that doesn't have that same situation. So while it certainly helped, it doesn't fix the problem. And I'll just end it with this, and then I'll try and not bother you guys anymore tonight.
Well, we reduced
It's okay.
Right?
We need to talk about the numbers though.
So, and it's great, it reduced it, but it didn't get rid of it.
After you're done.
My follow-up question, and it's really my big concern, is that if we continue and we don't make changes that are needed in terms of being considered a sanctuary state or sanctuary cities and the different policies, and the federal government pulls out money for the state because of that, what's your answer? And again, I don't expect an answer from you because I don't think anybody has one. But if we lose billions of dollars out of federal aid because of what our governor wants to do and thinks is right, and it doesn't take into account the actual residents of this state.
So I think we're all worried about a lot of different things from a federal perspective, right? There is the possibility that there could be significant cuts to Medicaid. If there are significant cuts to Medicaid, that's a big part of the Massachusetts budget. There are other federal funding sources that we rely on, unrelated to immigration, related to the other major priorities that affect all of us, that it's just unclear right now what could possibly happen with federal funding coming to Massachusetts. So it's not, it's a whole host of things. It's not a great place for any of us to be in. And that's not taking political sides, Peter, that's just the reality of what we're hearing of what could potentially be coming either from Congress or executive orders. Whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, there are a lot of unknowns and implications of federal funding coming to Massachusetts that we all have to be mindful of as we're building this budget.
Right, but one is a direct correlation to policies put in place by our state legislature and our state leaders. The others, you have no control over. The state wants to make cuts on this or that. I mean, the federal government wants to do that. They're going to do that, and they're doing that everywhere. But that one particular part that's hinged on immigration and whether or not we're helping uphold the federal laws, that's 100% the state's choice. And that falls back on your shoulders and the governor's shoulders.
It's a concern. I mean, obviously, we're more conservative on the South Coast. As you get toward Boston, you got the sanctuary cities that are fighting them, and it probably is going to hurt us. Just like I mentioned while you were speaking, just so you know, the numbers, I think, were 7,100 on January on families, or just at the end of December, went down to the funding that we were doing. Was down to 6,000, and we made sure it went down to 4,000, and part of that thinking was influx, like you said. We actually had the same problem, and of course, we're not gonna complain about it, we had the same problem when we gave veterans a bonus. People from all over the country were coming here to get their bonus and then moving out again. But of course, I think we all support that. It just was a problem we didn't think was gonna happen. They come here and grab the money, so. But yeah, that's part of the thinking of reducing the numbers, is so more don't come.
And don't get me wrong, I do appreciate you guys, the job that you do, the time you take to came here. But obviously, I'm frustrated, and I know I'm not the only one.
Well, you should be. I mean, we are too. You know, we like I said, when we get in the room, we bark at each other and say stuff, and then we got a problem with a headline that doesn't go into details of what we discussed.
Look, I think we know that the federal gravy train to fund sanctuary policies is coming to an end. To all the states that support this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's potentially a good thing, because it's going to curb illegal immigration. We've already seen a difference. I don't know if you guys have seen the numbers in the border apprehensions. Just this February was down around 9,000. Last February it was 190,000 apprehensions.
Yeah. So
that's when you have competent policies in place compared to intentionally allowing an invasion of our country by an administration. This is what hopefully we're going to stop seeing so many illegal immigration into our state now. I think we're going to see a benefit of the federal policies being implemented now. Now, I want to go back to Medicaid, because I want to touch on the governor's proposed $2 prescription drug tax. Okay?
So we're very concerned with that.
Okay. So, and this, as a healthcare provider, I have concerns with that too. I read that this would possibly generate $145 million in revenue, which would then be put back into the Mass Health program, which has been depleted to help provide free care, and I'm going back to that, for illegal immigrants. So it's not, and Medicaid hasn't been cut yet, but our Medicaid here has been cut because we've had to fund free care. I mean, I can't get free care. If I walk into St. Luke's Hospital, I don't have my insurance card, they're gonna laugh at me. They're gonna say, get out of here. Somebody else can walk in and it doesn't matter. It's just, this kind of stuff can't continue.
Well, to be honest with you, when I saw that, I personally said, you gotta think of it from a political standpoint too on that. Why would you go after prescription drugs? That's seniors, it's
Exactly.
people that are voting for you. To me, that one didn't make much sense. I know your videos will be on the internet now, and the governor might slap me, but to me, it just didn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, maybe a little bit with the candy, because we diabetes and whatnot. I don't support
that. As a healthcare provider, I'm okay.
You support that.
Let the record show.
But the medication to us didn't make sense, to be honest with you.
No, we're hearing that from constituents, even independent pharmacists.
Yeah, they're really worried.
Yeah, because you get a lot of elderly people on fixed incomes, and they could be on multiple prescriptions. Some people will have 5, and so that's $10. That's $10 extra out of their pocket. It makes a difference. So I don't know. I want to. And Dave, you have a question?
Whenever we talk, I always like to talk about possible solutions or things. We were talking about it yesterday, and I think Massachusetts, I don't want to say is a byproduct of sort of the elitism that resides within the city of Boston, Beacon Hill. Not you guys, but you know where I'm going with. Where we've got Harvard, who has an endowment of over $50 billion. Not one tax is paid on that. I don't even think they pay property taxes. MIT, $24 billion. I mean, if you're looking at like a Municipal Empowerment Act, allow the municipalities to tax the institutions that have these endowments. I'm not talking UMass, don't give Dartmouth the ability to tax UMass Dartmouth, right? Not the state institutions.
Right.
But these, bigger than countries. Bigger than countries, for crying out loud. I mean, you're talking higher ed. billion, 50 billion, that's your budget, that endowment. I mean, there's potential there. Again, I don't know if we'll go anywhere in the form of legislation. I think Senator Montigny
I
has
think
filed that bill.
there have been bills filed
You know,
each
so
session.
lean into that kind of stuff, you know, and it's not just a grandstand, but I think it's fair is fair, you know.
That's a good point, Dave. I want to move on to basically the last thing, and then I know we have a resident in the audience who's also on the committee. He wants to ask a question after, so we're gonna finish up here pretty soon. Pensions. Right now, as of 2024, our current Massachusetts state retirement system has an unfunded liability of about $14 billion. The teachers' retirement system, about $25.5 billion. Both are expected to be fully funded by 2036, of course, pending investment returns. You know, I have some concerns with that, because are we really going to be able to attain that goal if we're going to be funding potentially $20 billion worth of green mandates? Where's all this money going to come from? I mean, that's an important piece here. So, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at. And then also, the way we're going about putting new hires into the pension system, is there any thought process on having new hirees to state government going into like a more private sector type plan, like a 401k, and having them vested that way? I don't know which way is more cost effective, but I think something like that should be looked at versus the old traditional system, the way it's set up now. Just my opinion. I don't know what you gentlemen think.
Yeah, we actually talked to the CEO of the Mass Retirees Association, Sean Duhamel, and he confirmed what you said in terms of when they anticipate both the teachers and state pension system being the reserve fund or retirement fund to be fully funded by 2036. And I think Bristol County is 2034 is what they're anticipating. So for municipal employees in Acushnet and other municipalities that participate in that. I think the last time that there was pension reform was in 2012, and that's when they changed a number of different things. And of course, that's all prospective for new employees like you were talking about. And so I know that there was some reference to how PERAC looks at actuary and whether or not there's an opportunity to be slightly more conservative. And I know that Mass Retirees is going to be talking to Ways and Means about some ideas that they have. But certainly we'll continue to see whether there's opportunities there. I know the alternative to move everybody just to Social Security, the cost actually is greater than through a defined pension.
I had seen that as well.
Yeah. But anyway, so.
Okay. Kevin?
Somebody else got something to say? Oh, you look that way.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've been talking about pensions and OPEB and things of the like for decades, right? And saying how unsustainable it's been. It's truly unsustainable. It's bankrupting us, municipalities, the states, the way I look at it. It's going to be bankrupt on it as well. He's got conservative numbers. I think the last time I looked at OPEB and pensions liabilities, there was over $100 billion for the Commonwealth of Mass. So I'd love to see how we're going to pay that off in the next decade. And that reform in 2012, I think it was moving employees from contributing 5 or 6% of their paycheck to 10 to 12% of their paycheck. So if you look at the contribution and the compound interest over somebody who spends 30 years in a municipality, regardless of what job it is, we'll just use a basic pension of $100,000, and they stood at $100,000 for 30 years, they get 80% of their pay, which is $80,000 a year. You look at the employee's contribution and compound interest, it gives them basically 7 years. This side is sustainable. Some of these folks are coming in early age 20, retiring at 55, right? So they got over their 30 years, they're at 55, they retired. You think they're only gonna live for 7 years? I've talked to a few retirees in law enforcement, they say, well, they only expect me to live 7 years. 20 years later, they still look healthy as hell, which is great, right? But think about that cost. Compound that now. So if 7 years is the number, They live for another 20 years at $80,000. It's $1.6 million on the taxpayer's back to keep that funding, that one pension, right? And who thinks that's sustainable? So when we talk about 401ks and things of the like, if you actually really thought about reform, I think there's a pretty simple equation, right? Is you don't let people jump into another position in best 5 years and all that stuff. Why don't you just cap it to a percentage of the highest earner in Social Security and say that's the maximum any municipal or government, however you want to name these people, can get in retirement. You got people making $200,000, $250,000 salaries in certain positions in government. The President of the United States gets $450, and 50 of that's a kickback, right? Depending on his expenditures, he's really $400. How are we paying certain people $250 for municipality jobs? It blows my mind. Figure out the pension on that person making $200, right? That's $160,000 a year sitting on the beach sipping martinis. How do we think that's a fair system when probably the highest earner in Social Security is making what, 40,000, 50,000? And if you're making anything above that, you would have to be earning 150, 250 for 30 years straight. The calculation in Social Security isn't my best 5 years. It's over the period of time that I spent in Social Security, right? But the pension system's not that way. The pension system says I can have a job making $30,000 a year for 25 years. I get a buddy that's in a political position that says, hey, give me that job at 150 for my last 5 years, and I'm banging out at 80% of that number. That system's lopsided as hell. I'll tell you why politicians don't do it, right? Because you're part of the system and you don't want to hurt yourselves. And I'm not talking about you two gentlemen, I'm just talking about politicians in general, right? It's like putting a gun to your own head. But is it sustainable for some of the younger generations that are in the system to tell them and promise them they're going to get 80% of their pay, and in 25 years from now, the system's not there to pay them, right? We're talking about Social Security being bankrupt. They're talking about, in the federal government, Social Security reform. When's anybody gonna talk about the public pension system and say, we need to reform that first? Because that's the higher expense than Social Security. People earning Social Security get peanuts for a paycheck, let's face it.
Well, Kevin, people in the private sector can't even come close to that 80% you're talking about.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's apples and oranges. I mean,
that's the point I'm trying to make, right? I mean, it's just, if you started looking at things a little bit more comprehensive and said, you know what, so I get it. So like, police officers, firefighters, and EMS, ambulance workers, right, it's public safety, you say, okay, this is your percentage above the top earner in Social Security, maybe that percentage is 30% above the top earner. You look at this category and say, this is the category you folks are gonna be in, and you're 25% above top step earner. You gotta do something like that, because quite honestly, giving people parachute pensions is a broken system, and it's been going on for decades. It's none of our faults in this room, but nobody's brave enough to step up and have an adult conversation about pension reform and why. It's a pretty simple conversation when you sit there and you tell the younger generation person that's sitting in front of you saying, well, this is the reason why we're gonna do it, because they're telling you you're gonna get it and you're not really gonna get
to
it.
your point, Kevin, why would somebody want to change it when they're benefiting from it?
That's what I just said.
Yeah, but we also have a problem getting people to work for it as it is now. If you cut it down more, you're gonna have less applicants.
You haven't cut it at all. It's been 80% forever. And look at the private sector.
No, I'm saying if you don't have that incentive.
Look, I got a lot of friends in businesses, right? I'm a business owner myself, and I've owned multiple businesses, okay? So I don't need to hear the labor story from anybody, okay?
Yeah.
But what I am gonna tell you right now, after that COVID thing hit, I know people in big businesses that are hiring people, and in 2 or 3 weeks, either that employee's just walking off the job because he doesn't want the job anymore, or you're firing him because they aren't capable of doing the job anymore, right?
Yeah.
And businesses are struggling because of that. But that doesn't get us back to the public pension system, right? I mean, it's a fool's game.
Yeah, and I should note, just for the people at home or whatever that's listening to you, most people can't retire at 55, like DPW can't. It's only, like you mentioned briefly, the public safety, police, I believe fire too, they can retire at an early age.
Well, just to clarify too, police officer, life expectancy after retirement is 5 years.
That's what he said, like he said, 5, 7 years.
That's what I was talking about with the gentleman, I was talking about 7 years.
Yeah, so not everybody can go at 50.
And it's way longer than that, right? And we can just talk about our own town with current chiefs of police that have retired,
Yeah.
so.
But you need to,
I'm not here to pick on chiefs of police, right? I mean, they got a job to do, it's a high ranking job in law enforcement, right? I get it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything about that, I'm not picking on one group or another, I'm just saying the system's unsustainable, right? It wasn't meant for that. That's where the system was meant for, right, is public safety. And then all the Teachers Association, if you look it up and do a little history on it, I think it was in the 60s or 70s, they got into the system. And now it's just the regular clerk sitting at a desk they're in the public pension system, my man. And quite honestly, I think it's ruining it for everybody else, that it was really technically designed
The state
for.
covers the teacher part, correct? The state covers the teacher
Yes.
pensions,
Yes.
not the town. Sorry. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
The bottom line is, we need responsible spending,
Makes sense.
and without that, none of this is gonna work. I mean, you're gonna have people can't stay in their homes, a lot of people on fixed incomes. I've lived in Acushnet almost my entire life. My parents still live in Acushnet, right down the street from me. I'd like to see them be able to retire in their home, but they're struggling. It's not easy for them. I help them out as much as I can, but sometimes things are a little tough. But when I see what I saw today, and I'm going to point this up because this was glaring when I saw this. The mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, spending $650,000 taxpayer-funded money to a private law firm to consult her on how to get through a congressional hearing today. That is freaking appalling. I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, what freaking nerve does she have to do that?
Well, like you say, it's a different environment once you get toward Boston. They wanted more money, they fought us on the amendments we make, they wanted more.
It's
So,
ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope to God she doesn't get reelected, Healy doesn't get reelected,
Right.
because this state with that leadership is awful, and it has been since they've been in office.
On the Municipal Powers Act too, just so I think a couple of these mentioned it, one of the proposals coming forward too is a new property tax exemption for seniors that might be able to help us out a little, but that's, we've got to talk that out.
I'd like to give the gentleman in the back an opportunity to ask a couple questions.
I'm Eric James, I live on Slocum Street, and I want to thank the town for this major improvement, road improvement we're going to have on Slocum Street. However, there's no trees going to be planted on that, so if there's any possible way that we can have some trees planted on that street, even a half a dozen, because once those sidewalks are cemented in, that's going to be it, it's going to be permanent, and it will never have any trees on there. So I don't know if there's any money, if we can have any state money.
It's a green initiative, right?
Yes, it's a green
So we should be able to do
initiative. We do have a grant, a tree grant,
Yeah.
$3,000. It expires in June.
Did you send us an email?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I knew we had an email on that.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate it.
So, if we could do that before it's done.
Okay, see what we can do with it.
Kevin, go ahead.
Kevin, you on it?
You don't have to do anything with it. So, Mr. James, on March 18th, the Board of Selectmen are gonna have Woodward and Curran come in and give us an update and announce that Slocum Street project is gonna start construction. So I would welcome you there so we can talk about trees.
Okay, good.
So we don't need to do anything until we hear from you, if you need it.
So the only thing you need to do is I need 1.5.
Get the check,
I need
get the check.
1.5.
Get the check.
The 6 trees that he wants, they're big bucks.
It'll be covered?
Right?
Okay, yeah.
Well,
We're trying, come on.
I'm in a beautification committee, and we planted 4 trees. I purchased 4 trees from beautiful, red maples, beautiful 7-foot trees, and we planted them this fall. So 2 of them up at Council on Aging, and 2 of them on River Road. And they're beautiful trees, and that's what I want to put over on Slocum Street. Oak trees and maple trees. They're great street trees, and everybody knows what trees do, the benefits. We need them. We need them. And when we take trees down, we have to replant them. That's the key to the thing.
Okay,
You
so
know?
through the chair, you understood that, right? The selectmen are gonna handle it for now, and if you
Yeah.
have to follow up, they'll follow up
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah,
Because he
just-
sent us letters and we were gonna
And just
respond.
one other thing, we have that old library down there.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of state money out there we can, I don't know, we can get that money and we can do something, make that veteran housing, anything like that. I mean, it's happening in New Bedford. They're taking the fire department, an old firehouse, making apartments out of it. I don't know if it's even possible. Has anybody even looked into it?
So Eric was kind enough to reach out, spoke to my legislative director the other day, Betty. She's looking into that now. personal for me. My grandmother lived on Saucier
Can you just
Street.
tell everybody who your grandmother is?
I should have done that at the beginning.
She's an icon in this town.
Teresa Ledoux, former kindergarten teacher at St. Francis Xavier. She lived on Saucier Street.
To the ripe old age of?
103. She was
Wow.
a proud resident of the town of Acushnet for close to 70 years. She had the cane.
Yep.
I'm very proud of her.
Good to see you away.
I am a product of her and who she was as a human being, so.
You should have said that earlier, we might not gonna be.
Royalty in this town.
I've handled worse. But in any case, so we'll follow up. That old library, the Russell Library is.
Rough shape.
Yeah, and it would be a conversation to obviously have with the town about what the town does or does not want to do. with
Just you know, Eric, Brad Fish, our new veterans
Yeah.
agent, he's looking into that stuff for veterans housing potential.
Okay, so we have the American Legion and we have the VFW. We can have fundraisers, we can raise money. We did that for the memorial, Veterans Memorial. So we can do things. If it's possible, we can do it. So the idea is to look into it
Yes.
and see what's available.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, and Betty just texted me. She's been watching this, so she's on
Okay.
it. She's double on it now. So.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you, sir.
So if we,
I
if
want
I
to
can,
wrap things up. I want to wrap things up. Yeah. What is it?
So we're just talking
I'm
about
eating
green,
cereal tonight.
green energy and some numbers that are there that I just saw in a peer review energy. And this takes into account full system usage, so this is delivery on the different types of energy, includes delivery as well as the cost of
Supply.
manufacturing the electricity. Solar power in a state like Texas, which has a much better chance of creating electricity than here in New England. It costs $413 per megawatt hour to generate. Wind power, $291 per megawatt energy to generate. Nuclear, $122, coal, $90, and natural gas, $40. So when we start talking about a green energy deal, green energy is nowhere near as inexpensive as fossil fuels.
Yeah, so John, I mean, we hit on that a lot tonight, obviously. And it's for obvious reasons, it's because of the potential cost and what it's gonna do to the state.
Can I just piggyback back for 1 second, just so you folks know too, because this is another angle, you say, you know, it turns out to be the problem with the energy, but I've also had a problem, people contacting me, they're paying their bills on their credit card. The 18% cap came off a couple of years ago.
Yep.
So people are paying 35% interest on top of the ridiculous bills. So that's another direction we gotta go, see what do we gotta do to try to get that straightened
that's why
out.
they have $1 trillion in credit card debt for the first time in the history of
Right.
America,
Yeah.
right?
That's what I mean, so it's
pretty sad.
multifaceted.
Yeah, it's pretty sad that people are using credit cards to pay for
Yeah.
utility bills.
It is.
But anyway, gentlemen, thank you for coming into the octagon, so to speak.
If I could, I'm sorry, I'd introduce my legislative director, Craig Dutra. He's also a Westport Selectman, and he's my only one staff, so if he follows up with you, you know who you're talking to, Craig Dutra.
I introduced myself to him earlier, yes.
All right, thank you.
So thank you, we
Sure,
appreciate
of course.
you guys coming in and continued, further meetings with you guys. This
Yes.
is the first time, we've done something like this, but I felt like it was needed, and that's why I wanted to coordinate it.
Sure.
But I think I'd look forward to doing this maybe once a year, to just kind of reset and see where we're at and see how things are going.
So hopefully we'll be here before that with the 1.5 million.
We'll see you next week.
So- We'll try. We'll try.
We don't want any more cardboard checks.
It was 1.5
Thank you,
million in
everybody.
2014.
Appreciate it.
It's interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, no problem.
We gotta close our meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, I knew so.
Well, you guys. Our next meeting is March 12th.
Oh, yes,
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're closed.